So I think we still got some people outside, but we should get going. Next up are Peter and Justin. Do you have a PowerPoint you want to? No? Okay. Let me just.
Why did I introduce that question?
So you need to do it here and there now? Do it every single time?
Well, today I did not do it.
You didn't?
But on my phone, so I don't know if my phone reads it.
Oh, you also have to do it.
The last of the cats have been herded. It's a good thing we don't have big cats like you guys. They'd be chasing you. Yes.
Give them 1 minute.
Sorry?
I go, no, give 1 minute.
No, I think we can just. Just before we. You find it, Captain? Peter just asked me to mention something. He forgot to say that the Economics for the Anthropocene project is joint with 2 other universities besides McGill. There's York University and the University of Vermont. Okay, it's all yours.
Okay, good morning. I would want to pick up from where I left on Monday. On Monday, I gave an overview of the struggles of my community and the struggles of forest communities in Kenya. Today, I would want to, go to specifics on what we are actually, how are we looking at resolving the problem that we have. A small introduction, the forest communities in Kenya actually are communities that live in the most sensitive areas in Kenya. They live in places that have been designated water towers. In my community, out of the 5 water towers in Kenya, we have 3 water towers being part of the indigenous, these forest communities' lands. So, and those are the lands that the government in Kenya look at them with, they feel these are lands that it's the lifeline. That's how they look at them. But in the, when these lands were being taken away during the colonial time, the reason for that was that these were very small communities that will actually be absorbed by the neighboring communities. So the context has changed. That time it was very powerless communities, which they are still powerless today. So that has led to a lot of marginalization. And that's why I was saying on Monday that we find ourselves in a very interesting time, that the law today, which is the Constitution, which these communities worked very hard on, to have some small recognition, because all the laws from the colonial time did not recognize these communities. So we have at least some part that recognizes that their lands are community lands, and these lands are gazetted forests today. And on the other hand, the government, while the law accepts, the government does not believe that these communities can take care of those lands, because the history for the last 50 years has been to evict them. So we find ourselves in a very interesting and exciting time. Okay, so with this, we've also tried to, while some communities are in court, but we are also trying to look at a negotiated settlement with the government, whereby we are telling the government that, you know, historically we've taken care of these lands anyway. That's why those forests would not be there. And the discussions that we are having are such that some government agencies like the National Land Commission seem to agree with us or partially agree with us, but the main conservation agencies, those tasked with managing these forests, are saying no. So, and this is leading us to look for, you know, other people that can probably, you know, help us. Like, for example, you know, I've mentioned the issue of mapping. It's something that we've discussed within my community and other forest communities, about 6 of them. There's a difference between ourselves producing the maps and somebody producing maps. And, you know, that is the advantages that we see, you know, being part of like CICADA. Knowledge transmission, that's another one, because I mentioned the other day about bylaws, but these bylaws, you know, we've produced them and given them to government, but for government, they just take them and, you know, I doubt if they read them. But before they were saying, where are they? So I think, you know, discussions can be generated in forums like this if there's these government officials also being part of it. And that's maybe our interest in this, so that if we have some of these, you know, made into publications, for example, you know, those publications can be taken seriously and government can, you know, be part of that discussion. I mentioned also about a process, an IUCN process that brings together indigenous communities and governments for a discussion, the Wakatane process. And from my community, I think when I was making the presentation, our court case was coming on Tuesday. We weren't successful. The court case has been pushed forward. But the point I was making is that this came in because of these discussions, that this platform that came up from Wakatane, whereby it allowed us to negotiate with government. And now we are trying to go for an out-of-court settlement, where the government is actually agreeing to say, you know, the land belongs to the community, but we'll give you with conservation conditions, which, I mean, conservation conditions is things that have been there. So that this Wakatane mechanism has a lot of potential in helping other communities. This was with my community, but we are looking at maybe having publications such that, or films such that these can be upscaled and maybe not only help communities in Kenya, but maybe communities elsewhere. And then we are looking at contrasting. The other day, I mentioned that we are from the Mount Elgon, and on the other side, at least the Kenyan side, we still have the Ogiek community, the forest community in the forest. But the other side, the community has been completely moved. That's the side of Uganda is completely out of the forest. So having some of this research whereby you compare this would be something that maybe if it's brought on table, it generates discussions. And then developing pilots, because I just said the conservation agencies in Kenya, Kenya Forest Service, Kenya Wildlife Service, do not believe communities can take care of forests. That's what is there. But we look at developing networks whereby we can have themselves also maybe looking at what is happening elsewhere, generating those discussions. And these are some of those platforms that, you know, can help in that. I would...
Yeah, well, just picking from there. So the former director of Kenya Wildlife Service has been in court for poaching. the current director of the Kenya Forest Service in court for illegal logging. So just to be clear that these conservation bodies assume communities look at the resources in the same way they do, which is take control of it in order to exploit it and get the cash you can from it and not sustain it. So we're dealing with that kind of situation, communities are dealing with a situation where they're trying to say, you know, we can conserve these lands, we can conserve these forests if you give us secure tenure so we can think and act for the long term. And the bodies they're negotiating with are just saying this doesn't make any sense. In fact, if I remember rightly, when Kenya Wildlife Service guards were called by the community rangers from the Ogiek community because a poacher had killed an elephant, the Kenya Wildlife Service guards were shocked that they hadn't cut the ivory off to sell it. Yeah? So it's like there's a very big, you can see the contrast in mindset there. And so what Kitelo was referring to there was kind of the usefulness, potentially, of working in with you guys around the mapping, the place names mapping, and doing that kind of activity from the ground up in Kenya. Also maybe the archaeological stuff in terms of the caves and so on, but that's another matter. The need to document the assessments that have been done, the Wakatani process, how it's worked and how it hasn't worked. Need for publications. We've got a lot of film. Kitelo's organised a huge amount of filming's gone on, filming of community meetings, filming of all sorts of events, interactions with government. We've got a lot of stuff which we haven't been able to transform yet into material that can be persuasive internationally. So that's not a second aspect. And the third aspect there was that contrast between the Uganda side, where the elephants have gone, the forest's gone, the indigenous forest gone, it's controlled by conservationists, everything's destroyed, and the Kenya side, where the community's still there, though it shouldn't be there, according to the law. I mean, according to the Constitution, it should, but according to the way the government plays out the law, it shouldn't, and the elephants are there, and the forest still. So that kind of very sharp contrast would be a very useful one to make, and then developing this pilot process across Kenya, which is, you know, what's needed at the moment. But also, basically, the problem is that any positive example is something that those who don't like positive examples want to destroy. So we have a slight technical hitch here, in that when you publicise the situation, as Kitelo did recently with a big 2-page article in one of the 3 major newspapers in Kenya, publicising, you know, what's gone on, then immediately there's kind of there's a response of kind of like burning homes and so on, because there's a desperate need. As before every dialogue, there's a burning of homes and so on goes on, because the authorities want to make sure that this good example is stopped, so that they can say, you either have, you know, conservation controlled by the powers that be, or, you know, you have ruin, basically. So there's a real wish, as you'll all know from your context, to demonstrate that from the powers that be to say there's no alternative, basically. So my only addition to what Kitelo said is a kind of slightly wild idea, which probably doesn't fit, but I'll say it anyway, which is around listening to, you know, Monica's example of the Cree, you know, the kind of protected area being created by the Cree from their own point of view, you know, for their own good, it sounds like. And other examples like that, that I know, say, in Scotland, where communities have refused to have protected areas created, but also refused, you know, fish farms and other developments, have insisted on maintaining control of their lands. And just thinking about some forms of community exchange between, for example, in Canada, in Scotland, where I also work, and in Kenya, and looking at those kind of community exchanges that involve the devolved governments in Scotland, in Bungoma County, in Kenya, and in whichever is the appropriate level of government here. I mean, because there's a few, so whichever one's appropriate. Because the need to ensure buy-in from the county government in Kenya is critical. There's a lot of funding in the climate change area in Scotland that could be used towards this linkage and so on. And there's presumably other areas around climate change. So a climate change focus can be useful, because climate change is just about the ground being taken from under our feet. And that's, you know, I mean, climate change is not a separate category, obviously, as we all know. It's just it all being just taken out from under us. So how do you pin the Leviathan down? How do you support communities to be able to stay on their lands and retain control and be able to secure it so the Leviathan isn't just tearing the whole stuff apart? I'm just using that word poetically, I don't know. You can make your own meaning of it. So involving devolved governments and involving conservationists as well in a process of exchange between communities that can be supporting each one in each place to get support from outside, I think might be a very useful way of also lubricating and mobilizing funding as well for these processes. Okay.
Great, we have some...
Questions? Or
We've
another
got-
coffee break, which is what we normally do. Yeah.
Could I ask one quick question before opening it to the generality, and that's about CICADA as a potential platform for communication and I think you mentioned, I think you were exploring that. Is there anything we could do as the kind of group that we are that wouldn't be better done by, you know, the existing network of the ICCA consortium, for example?
Maybe you should be adding that FPP cannot do.
Yeah, and that FPP is.
Yeah, yes, and that's what I was talking about. Our university is seen as a neutral player. I know, I know there's a debate on that, but I'm just saying, maybe in our context, that government and communities, and why not maybe invest in Kenya, for example? That would be the next question. You have experience being, Canada being a country that also has First Nations here. And you've done a lot of work maybe already with such communities and other communities across the world. I don't think that is the kind of what universities in, for example, Kenya have done. So this, I think there is a lot of, that to me is the strength that, you know, such kind of CICADA brings to this, yeah.
So it's maybe a rhetorical move in a way, but it's bringing in, it's saying this is a research focus. So this is unusual because research is often seen as extractive, but this is using research strategically and in a supportive way to communities to be able to build their case and to be able to actually respond to powerful players. And ICCAs are great, but it's that they don't have that, they're not given, as you say, that kind of notion of a neutrality, which there's 1,000 debates, but nevertheless in the world it does carry that weight. So maybe that,
And incidentally, if there are people, specific people we should be articulating with in the university world of Kenya, that's we're open to suggestion, you know, for incorporating new collaborators.
They are there, I think.
John.
So, Peter, you just posed a research design, which is really compelling, which is looking at the Ugandan and the Kenyan side with regard to the different policies, the situation of indigenous peoples, and the state of the wildlife. I mean, it's ambitious, and I don't know if one could get access in Uganda to these areas. On the other hand, there are various ways of getting at it. Of course, there'd be aerial surveys and other surveys that are done perhaps through the government. But I think that's a really interesting and compelling and important piece of work. I don't know if we're well positioned to do it, but you know, that's something to work on and to think about how that might be organized because of its the crucial policy implications.
And we do have a number of trans-border issues among other indigenous partners where provincial, territorial, state boundaries have bedeviled their agendas for integrated homelands.
Well, the ICANN project is organized as a trans-border project to compare the Tanzanian and Kenyan policies with regard to conservation. I didn't mention that, but that's the structure of the project.
That's a political question, and it needs a political answer as well. I think it would be, when you are doing some of this, maybe if that was to be done, for example, it should not be framed as a comparison in the beginning. Maybe do independent studies, and then comparison should come later. So it has to be, these things have to be done. Otherwise, you're right, you might not come from the Ugandan side when you're doing your research, or they will not give you access anyway. That's what they do. I think you have a better understanding of the political situations in some of these countries. So it has to be done also with that in mind, because what we would be interested with is not the conflict that it can come, but the outcome of the results. So looking at ways of,
We do have at McGill some people who are working on Ugandan conservation issues, so it may be some place to pursue.
Yeah, thank you.
And I guess in a way we're not, we have expertise, there's community expertise and there's expertise in FPP as well around this, but it's more looking for the connections and the links with people and then possibly seeing if other people want to come in at particular places and points in this process. And so it's more embedding this that we're doing already within a CICADA frame. Do you see what I mean? So it's not like we can't do anything, can you do something for us? It's like we're doing lots, we could do with a bit of help and support here, in different ways. But also the whole publication and the getting the information out there in a frame that's going to carry more power than as an FPP document or a community document that it's coming from, from that frame.
Yeah. Excellent. And the clock just hit 0.
Winners again! Yay!
So we move from Forest Peoples Program Africa to Forest Peoples Program Colombia with Hector and Viviane.
Bueno, vamos a hablar en español, entonces...
I am going to speak Spanish.
Pues en este proyecto tenemos dos...
For this project, we have, well, 2 projects really that are ongoing that will end early 2017. They are funded by the embassy, the Norwegian embassy in Holland, and the Norwegian Research Council. It is in collaboration with the University of Norway. The idea is to follow up on this project to see how we can situate ourselves with regards to CICADA. So we will work on projects and the CICADA framework, but to see how we can create a link with CICADA. We have considered many different possibilities with different components that we have to follow up on, and an inter-ethnic project between the people's communication communities, African descent with Cañamomo, the state and the reserve where we developed all these themes, relative to the instruments that are to be adequate to see how we implement the right to consultation and, of course, prior free and informed consent. The idea here is to follow on the things that we have accomplished in terms of adjusting the protocols, the joint strategy that we have put together to follow on the footsteps of that, to see the ancestral minds can be recognized officially by the state, not like something illegal, but to be part of the Colombian framework and to follow that with the ancestral minors who must be supported in each locale, La Guaga Indígena, the guardians of the territory, the guardians, indigenous guardians that must protect the territory from third parties, foreigners, private interests that wish to lay their hands on the resources in the territory. So to follow up on these organizations for this project. So this collaboration is very difficult to establish. It was very interesting, however, between the black communities north of Cauca and Cañamomo at Pieta, the reserve, and what do we anticipate for the future. That's what we want to drill down on, and we will have a meeting on that in Colombia very soon. The second component is one element. Thank you. I speak too quickly, it seems. I'm sorry. Thank you to the interpreters who are doing a wonderful job. So, the second component is to follow up on the judicial process with regards to the defense of the territory and the reserve, and there will be a decision from the Constitutional Court in Colombia, a decision with regards to mining concessions that are on the territory, and so we must have a support of knowledge on this territory there will be a collective territory. We have to follow up on that and create relationships with mapping. We talked about that already. The idea is to reinforce all the judicial tools as to occupation and usage of this territory, what we have done historically. And so the idea is we want to extend the territory because it is too small. There's a lot of delicate issues that we have to look at. Mapping can be dangerous. We have to avoid traps. This could be dangerous, especially with regards to armed conflict and very little land available to indigenous peoples. So we see what the linkages we can create. The first idea is to create linkages with what is done by Jose and Terry relative to this idea of free and informed consent everywhere in North America. The third point, and I would like to drill down a little bit more on this idea of conservation. The planting of trees in the reserve, Resguardo, and the protection of watersheds, and that is done so that we can protect the territory, whether it be and keep it in a good shape, and to be stewards of the territory. Fourth point, I'm going to let you speak. Okay, I will continue. Fourth point, of course, the lobbying that we must do internationally to exert pressure to defend the rights of communities, and I think that here the research center should consider the possibility that there might be some good ideas from academic circles, the adoption of elements that can serve the community. Arturo Escobar, I think they worked with the communities of the Pacific in Colombia, and they helped us to have a group of academics and erudite persons when they come up with an idea that helps the committee in this idea of, well, I'd like to put that on the table. What Andre said, it's something that we could do and that can help us, that these academics come and help us. And I would like to once again thank, as a First Nations person, to thank all of you for this wonderful opportunity that you have given to us. We would like to thank all of you. Camilo and others were with us on the front lines and made this opportunity possible. Thank you to all of you, because for me, this was the cherry on the cake on the sundae, because we talked about these ideas that are interesting for us, these issues that are related to our territory. After 6 years of work, we have been able to accomplish some things, and that we accomplished some substantive work that we will to share. We have a lot of things to share with you. There's this idea of the legislative exercise, this internal legislative mechanisms, the resolutions that we talked about. So we are at your service. We want to present the results of our work. Our dream is to be able to continue our work on these issues, because we believe that we have in our community been able to make major progress. We have strengthened our community thanks to this work. The resolutions were a tool, and we want to continue on that. The protocol, the consultation, free and informed consent is a very important element in our community. We want to say that the authorities and the indigenous peoples and the actions of leaders in our community, but mandates change, of course. Communities wish to have different representation, and so we must offer training to ensure that the chiefs that change, that come and go, also have knowledge of these tools. We want to ensure continuity of the information despite the change of leadership. So develop mandates and tools and the process that we all know, and we create environmental resolutions for the reserve. And so this whole environmental question, we want to have environmental resolutions, as I said, and they will become tools, working tools, internal ones, and in the judicial framework, but it shouldn't be like that, Viviane said. And so why should we fight on this front? There's already enough work to do in the community, so many challenges in the community. We are obligated, unfortunately, to have to defend ourselves before the international level, and we are awaiting a decision from the court that protects our reserve. We hope in September we will have a favorable response from the court, the highest court of the land, to guarantee our right to the titles. We need some help in this to be able to follow up on that and reinforcing our government. This is important. Is related to the fact that we must count on the synchronicity. Do you know what I mean? This synchronous element, authority-wise, that there be a synchronicity, that there be clarity in terms of this concept of government. We must reinforce permanently. We must have a permanent dialogue and discussions to the idea is not just to consider questions of the day. We have to have a permanent dialogue and continuous discussion with regards to rights, to defense of the peoples, of the indigenous peoples, and reinforce our stewardship mechanisms in the reserve is very important. That's what creates the surveillance. These are the guardians of the territory. That is how we can safeguard our reserve and protect it from external harm. There are people who wanted to exploit our territory. They come with machines and La Guardia, the guard, literally the indigenous guard, they watch these activities and stop them from happening. It is very important. So we have a new scenario before us that is quite important to replant the reserve, to plant trees. Our reserve is different than Fanny's, who is more in the forest. We are more in a central area for 1,800 hectares for 25,000 people. There's a lot of pressure on our resources, so our task is a difficult one. We must reforest the reserve. The committee of people who wanted to have some solidarity, and they wanted to pursue this campaign. We wanted to do a major campaign environmentally. We do diagnostics. We evaluate many elements of georeference, and we will georeference the different sources of water. There's 334 sites that are georeferenced, and we must construct a system around these sources of water. We identify many points, identify these sources that, because we want to know how to get access to these resources. And so I can't explain everything, but there's much interest in this question of environmental proposal, and so we would like to plant 30,000 trees, and the next objective is to plant 30,000 trees on our reserve. That is our aspiration. We are generating the conditions that will allow us to do that. So now the people want to structure their own activities, objectives to be able to satisfy these expectations. We have a lot of hope. Our work can be articulated around works of other networks, national and international, and we have met many representatives of these networks here as well, and we have much support. Our support is not always economic in nature. There's moral support. They give us ideas. They accompany us. In the case of the judicial aspect, we are working virtually with some of our friends. For example, there's the Forest People program and certain lawyers and countries that help us. Thanks to Skype, they accompany and coach us for the defense of our reserve in a legal way. So we, with much hope, we look at this possibility of defending our reserves so that it may be maintained, and we have hope and faith in what we're doing for our community. Thank you.
Okay, they're on.
Ahora sí.
Thank you again for your talk and your explanations. My question is maybe a bit deeper than just CICADA. Your process is interesting to me. How do you articulate the work with the committee, the Afro-Colombian Committee? The question considers another perspective. So because of the peace treaties, there were reserves, indigenous reserves, the role, I heard about that. Can you tell me more? I would like to know if we can anticipate things in regards to this very quickly. This is an important issue. First, we would like to, since from your different perspectives and scenarios, if you can accompany us and help us, because a new hope of peace in our country. This is a historical time for us, and 500 years of a terrible situation, half a century of death. We're talking about thousands of deaths and people who must migrate and are delocalized, and people who are assassinated. This is too much for a small territory like ours. And so, yes, there's some hope for us, but respectfully, if you can help us in whatever way possible, please. There's also the extreme right wing, Uribe, Sevilla. They think that war is better than peace. And so why? Because they profit from war. And of course, and so respectfully, with regards to reserves, indigenous reserves, that's not the only thing. Our community, Rio Sucio Caldas, there are only reserves, resguardas, but scenarios of other zones of the country and the First Nation zones, these are important demands, and we does not go against native reserves, and it is not antipathetic to the demands and the. It's a new judicial mechanism to recognize the rights to the territory. It's great to be able to support that and help, but it is not part of our main preoccupations of our work. Well, that's great to talk about the peace process. For Colombia, it is an opportunity to advance with a new narrative. We are forest people, and what preoccupies us is to know what we will do, what will happen with the forest, what is in store for the Amazon forest. For the Amazon region, we represent almost half of Colombia. We are 6 departments, 6 provinces, then 3 of these 6 are fighting the ravages of massive deforestation. There's a lot of monoculture, there's a lot of cattle operations, there's deforestation, colonization, colonists that come from the outside, and according to these colonists, cutting trees and cutting the forest to raise cattle is good. Well, not for us. A lot of the people could not penetrate into the forest during the existence of guerrilla warfare. They were afraid of going through certain territories, and because of the presence of armed groups, guerrilla groups. But now that that is not there anymore, what will be the impact? What is in store for our forest? And I said at the outset, our forest risks peril in one way or another, so we are always at the razor's edge, and we don't know what will happen. Jaime said also we want to accompany these processes, but there's the Reich, this process, there's a lot of mechanisms to attenuate climate change, and climate change that the communities pay for this climate change. Thank you, Hector.
Next is Leah Temper, who is the director of ACKnowl-EJ, acronym for Academic Activist Co-Production of Knowledge for Environmental Justice.
Thank you. And oh, okay. Because the other option is you could just play it from there, and I'll. Okay, they're just queuing up the.
It doesn't sound like your mic is on.
Hello?
Is the mic okay? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah? Now? Yes? Oh, perfect. Okay. Well, they are preparing the PowerPoint. I will begin anyways. So I'm going to talk about the project called ACKnowl-EJ today, Activist Academic Co-Production of Knowledge for Environmental Justice. And this is a project funded by the International Social Science Council. It's a bit of a particular call. It's actually a strange funder because this is the first time that they're funding research projects we're funding several research projects under what they call transformative knowledge networks. And the point of these projects is to generate knowledge and understand the processes, the outcomes, and the impacts of transformative social change within the current context of environmental change. And the aim of this initiative is really to have transdisciplinary projects and using a very global comparative perspective. Okay, well, I see that I'll just run the PowerPoint from here. So.
Large green button for, yeah.
There we go. So the project has 7 member institutions. It's co-led by myself. I'm based at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and Ashish Kotari. Some of you might know him he's quite active. He works with a civil society organization called Kalpavriksh, based in Pune, India, and he's very involved in the ICA consortium. He's known actually for coordinating India's national biodiversity strategy and action plan some years ago that involved a broad consultation with about 50,000 people in India, and it was completely disregarded and dismissed by the Indian government for being way too radical. Other partners include the University of East Anglia Platform, which is another advocacy NGO based in London, Bogazici University, and Grupo Confluencias, which is a social transformation, conflict transformation network with many members based around Latin America. And finally, and I don't see them there, sorry, that's a mistake. The American University of Beirut, because part of the project, I won't focus so much on it because it's not as relevant for CICADA, but we're actually looking at environmental justice and what that means in the Middle East and North Africa. So the history of this project, just to take you into the background, is that it builds on work that has been ongoing for many years, building on a previous project called EJOLT, Environmental Justice Organizations, Liabilities and Trade. This was a very large international project with over 23 members. About half of them were social movement organizations and NGOs, and half were researchers. And within that project had many outputs, and I was the leader of one aspect of the project, which was the creation of a global atlas of environmental justice. And this project aimed to build on the work that our civil society partners had been doing and the activist knowledge that they had accumulated over 20 years of documenting resistance and struggles against extractive and waste disposal conflicts. So we work with organizations such as GRAIN, World Rainforest Movement, different partners in Brazil that had been mapping conflicts. And the idea was to take all this knowledge about conflicts globally and to create a global database where we could systematize all the conflicts. The unit of analysis of this database is actually, it's project-based. So we look at resistance to specific extractive projects generally. And we divide those projects along 10 primary categories, including nuclear conflicts, mining and mineral ore extraction conflicts, biomass and land conflicts, water management conflicts, industrial and utilities conflicts, biodiversity conservation conflicts, and so on. And then we have actually a second level category where we have 50 types of activities that we examine. And I was hoping to have my computer and to take you through, perhaps. Yeah? Yeah. Well, it's okay. I'll just continue here. And I invite you all to go to the webpage yourselves and explore. So it's possible, as you can see here, to browse through the maps. You can see by the companies, so look at one company, see all the conflicts that they're involved in. You can look by country. You can also look by the home country of the companies involved. So you can see, I think we have over 200 conflicts involving Canadian companies, many of them mining conflicts. You can also look at the groups involved. So in this case, you see that we have 774 of the 1,839 conflicts that are currently documented involve Indigenous populations, which is a significant amount. And I'll show you a little bit of data later about some of the dynamics, specific dynamics of conflicts involving Indigenous communities. Here you can see a kind of a close-up of one of the cases, and each case has about 100 fields that has a short description of the conflict. It describes the actors involved, the impacts, the outcomes, references, and so on. So here's one on the Yanacocha mine. You zoom in and you can actually see the satellite data. Here's another one on the Mero Dam in Sudan. And so an interesting, there's been many interesting outcomes of this project, and it's really a hybrid in the sense that it has many uses by many different types of audiences and actors. So there's been a lot of press on the project. When we first launched it, we launched this project 2.5 years ago. Up to date, I think about 800,000 people have visited the site. We have an average between 1,000 and 1,500 people that visit the website daily. And we did a survey to kind of see who are these people, what are they using it for? And as I mentioned, it's very diverse. A lot of journalists use it, students use it, it's used as a teaching resource, it's used obviously as a reference. So you can see there was quite a lot of press. The interesting thing is all the countries wanted to kind of claim, we have the most conflicts, we have the second most conflicts. They didn't really always understand perfectly the methodology. Here, for example, in Colombia, we have a researcher that has done a quite thorough job of mapping conflicts there. I think we have over 80 conflicts mapped in Colombia. And when the map was launched, it coincided with a terrible drought in Colombia. And you can see this is the cover of a newspaper, national newspaper, saying that this tragedy of the drought coincides with the publication of a study that says Colombia is the country with the second most ecological conflicts in the world, which is not correct. It was that was just the representation at that time. But it shows you a little bit the use of the atlas, and here you can see they've done within the newspaper a graphical analysis of the data in Colombia, looking at who are the companies involved, what are the resources, what is the land area impacted, and what are the investments. So, of course, we're also using a lot of this data to do different types of analysis. Here is a network analysis that was done by a student at Bogazici University, and it allows you to get an idea of the investments, the companies that are involved, the different conflicts that they're involved in, and kind of the links between them. So it's difficult. I won't go into depth in it. I'm just giving an overview of the types of analysis we've been doing. We also collaborate with different organizations on featured maps that can help support campaigns. So this is one that we just released recently that was made together with the Union of Affected Peoples by Chevron. They have an International Chevron Day. So this map, we already had many Chevron conflicts mapped, but what they did was they got back in touch with all the communities to check the data and put it together in this featured map that covers more than 30 Chevron conflicts. And this is just a table showing a little bit about the presence of Indigenous people by type of conflict. So the blue means that in that type of conflict, we do have presence of Indigenous people. You can see that the mining conflicts is the one where we see the highest presence of Indigenous people. We have mining, fossil fuel extraction, biomass and land conflicts, and then on the low end is waste management conflicts, which are usually urban, tourism and recreation conflicts, and interestingly, biodiversity conflicts. And some other elements to look at, we also look at the outcomes of conflicts. So one question I had was, how does the presence of Indigenous communities impact violent outcomes in conflicts? So in the total sample of the EJ Atlas, Indigenous communities are present in about 44% of the sample. If I only look at the cases where we have deaths, you see that the presence of Indigenous communities is 69%. And when there's community repression, it's 62%. And when there's violent targeting of the activists, it's 64%. Meanwhile, with successful outcomes, such as the project being stopped or a successful court decision, company withdrawal, there's no correlation. So we'll now turn to the new project. I have only a few moments left. So after so many years of studying ecological conflicts, really the aim of the new project is to focus on the transformative elements within the conflicts. Within our perspective, we, rather than seeing conflicts necessarily as always something negative, you can see that the resistance of the communities can often lead to, at the level of the community, new forms of knowledge, that they're contesting the scientific legitimacy. They're taking new knowledge about their environmental health. We know about environmental justice comes from, is very much in hand with processes of popular epidemiology, where communities began documenting and creating their own knowledge about health impacts, and also new institutions. So here you see some photos and experiences of, that's a photo of Esquel, where they have put in place community referendums against mining. The Unistaten, there's a photo of the Unistaten that Stephen mentioned yesterday that I've also been studying, where they're creating an Indigenous healing center on a point that is in the GPS route of a proposed pipeline. And the photo of the ZAD, which is Zone à Défendre, it's a resistance camp in France. So this new project is really focusing on understanding under what conditions do these conflicts lead to processes of social transformation. And we're doing this in different ways. This is something that Ashish Kotari has been involved in for a long time, looking at different alternative visions of development. Some of them we've been discussing here from indigenous communities, such as Buen Vivir and Sumak Kosai. And there's also other alternative visions coming from the north as well. Degrowth, energy democracy, food sovereignty, as we mentioned. So another perspective that we're working in with the project, I mentioned we're working with this conflict transformation network. So the perspective is really, instead of thinking about how do we resolve the conflicts, let's think more about conflict transformation. So how do we look at these conflicts, the productivity of these conflicts and the creativity that can emerge out of conflicts. And one of the major goals within the project is the creation of a conflict transformation framework that is being applied to 10 different case studies to look at the processes of conflict transformation within the communities. And I will skip over this, but just so you can know that within this framework, we're looking at different forms of power and ways to transform these three forms of power, which is the institutional power, transformation of the institutional, legal, and political framework, the power of agency, which is the power the power of relations within the communities, building leadership and changing social relations, and the decentered power, which can include revitalization of local knowledge and creating counter-narratives. So there's different ways that conflicts can become transformed involving these three conflict transformation strategies. 3 minutes, thank you. And here's just a short sample. So within this framework, we're looking at 6 primary pillars. And within each of these pillars, you can see that we're looking at the 3 types of conflict transformation strategies I mentioned. One is the institutional, the social relations, and the cultural worldviews perspective. And these indicators or this guideline can be used by the communities themselves as a guide for understanding the processes of change and social transformation that are happening within the communities. And this conflict transformation framework is we're also combining it with an understanding of transformative alternatives that Ashish Kotari has been working on. He's working with 5 primary pillars of understanding what are the elements of transformative alternative and how can we synthesize the experience of transformative alternatives across locations. And these are the 5 primary pillars: ecological resilience and wisdom, social well-being and justice, direct and delegated democracy, economic democracy and livelihoods, and cultural and knowledge diversity. Here I just had laid out a few of the potential lines of collaboration that we could engage in between ACKnowl-EJ and CICADA, including what could be the creation of a featured map of case studies within CICADA that could be entered into the EJ Atlas and used for CICADA's own purposes. We have recently launched a pilot call for doing mapping with the EJ Atlas. The call ended today, and I think we have some 20 to 30 proposals from different organizations that want to use the EJ Atlas in their work. More joint work on our work on confluences of life projects and this radical socio-ecological alternatives. And as we mentioned yesterday, also we have within our project we have an access working on the collaborative methodology and understanding, coming up with process of ethics, and also different ways to understand what I like to call following June Borras is how do we know the political rigor of the work? It has to be scientifically robust. How can we also make sure that the work we're doing is politically rigorous? And we also, of course, work on mapping and visual methodologies. So thank you, and sorry I didn't leave much time for questions.
Terrific. We are at a time, and we have still two presentations, and we're going to be well into lunchtime because it's already 12, and 18 minutes each would take us to 12:40. I'm very grateful for you've got a very nice list of very concrete things that we can do together, and that's wonderful. I'll take one question or comment.
I have a quick question. What counts as conflict in your scheme?
Yeah. In our analysis, the conflict is defined by the mobilization of the communities. And in the term ecological is because in their mobilization, it should have an ecological claim or component. So they're mobilizing against perceived ecological impacts.
So that could be litigation or direct action.
Yeah. And within the analysis, we analyze the different types or the different forms of mobilization. And this comes into the analysis of how the forms of mobilization change depending on the context, depending on the project. Yeah.
Great, thanks. We'll move now to Clint Westman, Cultural Politics of Energy in Northern Alberta. And I should just say, when I referred to mining earlier as one of the extractive issues, I was, in my own mind, including petroleum, but I guess that's not always understood.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, it's great to be here, and it's great to have the welcome of the Wendat Nation. So I'm here to share with you some of the research I've been doing in Alberta. I've been working with Alberta First Nations in various ways for 20 years now. Hard for me to believe. I'm going to be talking about my most recent project. I'm currently in the second of 2 consecutive SSHRC-funded projects. The first was a 2-year project that was basically a solo project. And now I'm directing a 3-year project that involves a number of academics, mostly from Western Canada, but also including Colin Scott and his student Janelle Baker, as well as a number of Alberta First Nations. And so I'm about 16 months into that project. We're beginning to get some preliminary results. But mostly I'm just going to sketch out the project and our issues in broad terms. I should mention I'm also part of the Arctic Domus project. That was one of the original projects participating in CICADA, although that project is coming to an end. Okay. Oh. My community partners. These are the partners I'm working with. These are all boreal forest communities, First Nations and a Métis organization, as well as Keepers of the Athabasca, which is a settler and Aboriginal-led environmental organization based in northern Alberta. I don't have time to say too much about these First Nations. Suffice it to say that all of these communities include people who rely on hunting, trapping, fishing, and gathering for a large part of their sustenance, and that they also continue to have spiritual attachments to the land. The spiritual and ontological dimension and the ethical dimension is of special importance to the organization Keepers of the Athabasca, who have as their mandate to protect water and all life in the Athabasca Basin. The Athabasca River is a major northern river that ultimately goes to the Arctic Ocean, starting in Alberta. Okay, when we're talking about land rights and Aboriginal identity in Western Canada, particularly the Prairie Provinces, we're talking about historical treaties that were signed between 1871 and 1921. These treaties do differ somewhat, but in general they conferred to Aboriginal nations a small parcel of land and some rights that were defined chiefly around hunting and trapping, continued access to natural resources, in exchange for the surrender of this vast, vast territory. And the project that I'm focusing on is in Treaty 8, which I'll focus on in the next slide. So the Treaty 8 area covers most of Alberta and chunks of adjoining jurisdictions. Doing some internet research yesterday, I found out that the area of this treaty that was surrendered is over 800,000 square kilometers. So this is somewhat smaller than Pakistan and substantially larger than France. Unlike Pakistan and France, Treaty 8 is not known for its good cuisine, but food is still very important to the people who live there, and so food sovereignty is a key issue for the research team that I'm involved with. I should say that Northern Alberta is home to Cree, Dene, and Métis peoples, and I'm chiefly working with Cree and Métis peoples right now, although we would like to expand that to include some Dene nations as well. That's just an artifact of my own life history and those of my collaborators. We've mostly worked in Cree areas, although Dene people are facing similar issues. And in fact, many of the communities combine two, if not all three, of these ethnic groups. One of the key things that's come out of decades of litigation on Treaty 8 is the duty to consult Aboriginal people. And that's been advanced by litigation throughout Canada, but especially by the Mikisew Cree First Nation, one of my partners in Northern Alberta. And so I'll also say that in negotiating Treaty 8 in 1899, the Aboriginal negotiators were very clear and very forceful on the idea that they would continue to hunt and fish and trap on their territories and that they would not sign the treaty unless this right was conferred. Indeed, they did receive these guarantees from the Crown, and now these treaty guarantees since 1982 are protected by constitutional law in Canada. Although, as the chief said on the first day, the constitutional protections have been characterized as an empty box, so without much content that has to be filled subsequently by litigation. So the focus of our research right now is on grad student projects. We're in a developmental stage of our partnership, hoping to get a larger, more long-term grant that would allow us to do a bit more. We had a very nice meeting in May where Colin provided some discussant remarks, and we started the meeting with a ceremony led by Elder Mike Beaver. And I'll just note that in starting such a process with ceremony, it was amazing how bonds of trust were formed, and I guess we were welcomed more by the partners, so that's certainly something I would suggest others consider to do in appropriate ways. So the focus of the project is on not only the impacts and benefits of natural resources, mainly fossil fuels extraction, but also on the consultation processes and the environmental impact assessment processes that have been ongoing. And I've written quite a bit critiquing the environmental impact processes in particular. So these participatory processes become impacts in their own right as people devote an incredible amount of their time and energy to processes that, without exception, have resulted in major projects being approved, often in contiguous locations with massive cumulative impacts on Aboriginal people. And so my focus as a researcher is on the extraction zone in Northern Alberta, which I find is often written off as a sacrifice zone because much of the media and even academic analysis is focused on transportation infrastructure, i.e. pipelines, in other jurisdictions, with Northern Gateway Pipeline being the classic example, but Energy East being a current example. So I would like to put the focus again on where the oil is coming from. And so we're talking about conventional oil, but to a much greater extent, new forms of oil sands and heavy oil, as well as natural gas, which is in decline. So this is the oil sands bearing zone. The oil sands bearing zones are three, and together they cover an area approximately the size of Florida. The Athabasca oil sands zone is the largest. Some of the deposits in the Athabasca zone are mineable. The rest of the deposits have to be accessed by alternate means, including fracking and various types of in situ production that also cause massive environmental impacts, although they are not quite as dramatic or visible as those of the mines, which I'll show next. Okay, so this is a map of the leases that energy companies hold around the Fort McMurray area in the core Athabasca oil sands zone. You can see that these leases touch one another and don't leave any space in between. So this has caused massive problems for Aboriginal people who want to access their traditional territories, and indeed has caused pollution impacts and climate change impacts on a continental scale that we're still beginning to come to terms with. I would like to say that this is a bigger question than just Stephen Harper. There's been an all-party consensus at the provincial and federal level, excepting perhaps the Green Party, which is very weak, that we should advance the oil sands as a means to create prosperity in Canada. So it isn't something that can be pinned on one party or one politician. It's been a national priority for some years now, starting with the federal Liberals, incidentally. So there's been many, many impacts on wildlife, environment, air, water, and human health. I don't have time to document these now. The science is becoming more clear, although initially industry and the provincial government basically denied that there was any impact whatsoever. This has been seen as laughable for some time now, and we're starting to have scientific evidence to that effect. In terms of the community and relational ontology, you can see that people are being cut off from their lands, and so it has major impacts on people's ability to transmit their culture, including language, which is mostly transmitted in camps. And we also have the problem of people destroying homes, cabins in the bush where people spend a fair amount of their time, that are often destroyed, burned, knocked down, either by government or industry agents, although building cabins is supposed to be part of the Treaty 8 right to hunt with ancillary rights to live on the land. Just a couple of photos so that you can see the scale. This is the Suncor mine. You can see it's directly adjacent to the Athabasca River. You have the mill in the foreground and the mine in the background. Tailings ponds, which are toxic lakes that can be seen from space on the right. This tailings pond is directly above the Athabasca River, separated from it by a large berm. And scientific research has shown that the tailings pond is leaking into the river at the rate of 50 liters per second. So it's a major impact. There's also, of course, air pollution, as you can see from the smokestacks, although the company representatives will tell you that it's mostly steam. They do use a lot of water. Water is a major impact. They're drawing groundwater resources and surface water resources, such that the flow of the Athabasca River is impacted, particularly in the winter. People no longer fish in the Athabasca River, and travel in some parts of the river is becoming difficult. So again, this is having all kinds of impacts on people. There have been many proposals for protected areas in the core Athabasca oil sands zone. The government basically looked at the map to see where the richest oil sands deposits were and put the protected areas outside of that area. So it was definitely a prioritization of resource extraction, with what's left being protected rather than the protection being driven by ecological special places. Incidentally, most protected areas in Alberta that are protected by the provincial government continue to allow existing fossil fuels extraction to continue on the protected area. So this tells you about the degree of protection that we're seeing. So there are many, many governance and consultation mechanisms for Indigenous people to participate in. Some of these seem to work better than others. We're still trying to find the governance model for the oil sands, and a lot of these participatory processes, co-management, and governance structures have been critiqued. I'll also say that there are benefits for Aboriginal people in Western economic terms: contracts, jobs, large payouts that are secretive, but what I've heard to be billion-dollar payouts to First Nations in exchange for their support for major projects such as this. Northern Alberta, prior to 2015, has been the site of some of the most intensive capital investment in the world. Tens and tens of billions of dollars are committed, and some of that has been currently rolled back with the decline in fossil fuel prices, but we know that the companies are ready to advance their interests again once oil gets above maybe $60 a barrel or so. They were really going gangbusters when it was $100 a barrel. They made a lot of money. One other thing I found out on the internet the other day is that Alberta has 12% of Canada's population and 20% of GDP, gross domestic product. Most of that is from energy that we export. And so this tells you that it's very important to Canada's economy, and that a disproportionate amount of our staple exports are coming from Northern Alberta, which has been Canada's largest energy producer for some time. It became necessary for the governments to advance and attract investment in oil sands and new technologies using various tax incentives and write-offs, because the conventional oil that had been discovered in the 40s was in decline by the 90s, and various developments in the continental US began to make our large natural gas deposits slightly less attractive. So we had to switch to these new energy resources that are potentially quite a bit more harmful. Obviously, something like this creates a huge mark on the planet. There's other mechanisms that are a bit less intrusive. On the right, you can see, thank you. On the right, you can see cut lines that are the result of in situ extraction. Basically, instead of mining it, they put in a large battery of drilling equipment, and it creates a lot of these linear disturbances through the woods, which people can use to travel, not only Aboriginal hunters, but also non-native hunters. And you can see they inject water in one pipe in this particular method, and then melt the oil, which is not pumpable normally. It's not in a liquid form. So by sending steam down the hole, they can then loosen the oil and suck it up the other pump. Okay, so you need a lot of infrastructure such as pipelines, roads, power lines, etc. It creates a big mark on the land, and scientifically it's now being found to have similar impacts on air and water as to what we see from the mines. This in situ production method is the fastest growing method and will displace the production of the oil sands mines within the next decade or so. Yeah, so Janelle Baker's doing some great PhD work on this project with Big Stone. I have a couple of master's students. I'm going to wrap up really quick here. And some of the axes of CICADA that we would work well with, which I would like to support, we're contemplating with my steering committee to do so. Life projects, land tenure, livelihood and food sovereignty, politics of resource extraction being an obvious one. And I'll just close with this image of a popular action that has been organized for several years by keepers of the Athabasca. This is the Tar Sands Healing Walk, bringing together Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people who are concerned about the environment. And they literally walk past these installations, which takes hours because it's a massive area, in a form of silent protest to protect, again, land, water, and all life in the Athabasca Basin. And so we're trying to find a way to help them through action research to do this. Thanks.
Great photo.
Great. I'll just collect my stuff.
We have time for one or two quick questions, comments. Leah.
Thank you very much. Very interesting work. I mean, one question I have, also generally, is about the impact of the impact of this commodity price fluctuations. Firstly, on the production itself, which you mentioned, of course, it seems the prices go down and the production goes down. But I mean, one thing we're interested to look at within the ACKnowl-EJ project as well is also on the impact of these fluctuations on the, well, conflicts or on the environmental impacts. So as the prices go down, how do the production methods potentially change to cut costs? And what are the environmental or potential environmental impacts in terms of, you know, it could be spills or other issues into this shift in the production practices? I mean, I think, and it's interesting, I think, to compare it also between what potential differences might be in talking of extraction more broadly between something like oil extraction and then a gold mine, let's say, where, how does that change the rates of extraction and also the different methods of extraction? So I don't know if that's something you're planning to look at or...
Well, it's a very marginal field in economic terms, and very vulnerable to price fluctuations. That's true of many of the commodities that are produced in Alberta, especially oil sands, which is very high cost. So it does have impacts, and actually the First Nations' ability to participate and critique is also, in a sense, funded by industry. So as industry begins to retrench, the first thing that goes is these type of social responsibility programs where people lose the ability to strategically plan ahead for when the prices do increase again. And secondly, mentioning spills, there are spills. I've seen on reclaimed sites the kind of rainbow that you see in puddles on the street where there's fuel has been spilled. So you can tell that there's oil and gas left in dangerous ways. And I would assume, actually I know, that many of these become orphan sites when the price declines. And so you have proponents leaving their stuff behind. Suncor and the really established mines are still making money, but a lot of the other ones are losing money and hoping to, but they've invested so much capital they have to keep pumping.
Okay, thank you, Clint.
Thank you.
Okay, one more, and we'll be heading for lunch. Karine Van Tween of the University of Ottawa and Davikan Studnicki-Gizbert have a project, Davikan from McGill, sorry, have a project, Indigenous Engagements with Mining in Canada and Guatemala, which is building on that early connection that was made between the Crees and the Mayan Mam of San Miguel Ixtahuacan.
Alors bonjour, merci. Je vais continuer en
I will continue in French, so take advantage of the translation, if you will. So as Colin has mentioned yesterday, the project I built on the solidarity relationship that was between Wemindji and the Mayaman and Saint Miguel. So Wemindji, we found out a few days ago where it was, and so there it is. And the Mayaman and San Miguel, they are the Department of San Marcos. So the project, the research project for which I got an inside development grant, well, it's built on the relationship and solidarity relationship that was initiated when Ronnie and Colin went down to visit the communities affected by the Mina Malin in Guatemala, the Goldcorp mine. So after this visit, as Colin mentioned as well, the partnerships with the communities is not necessarily with the communities as such in terms of villages or municipalities. The partnership here is established with people affected by the mine, with a movement of resistance in particular against this mine that is the FREDEMI, the Frente de Defensa Midigense. And so the FREDEMI became a partner, community partner instead, and on the basis of this partnership, I went with Davikan in collaboration with Colin and with Catherine Nolin as well, who is part of CICADA but could not be with us today. This project of comparative research with the idea of starting from this, these two communities were interested in comparing their experiences with the mine, seeing that their relationship was completely different. And so we talked about that already. Wemindji has signed, and I insist on a lengthy negotiation, and signed an accord of collaboration with Goldcorp, who started their activities on the territory of Yushi in 2014. And so for a lot of people in the municipality of San Miguel and San Marcos, they just learned that there's a mining project that was going ahead on their territory when Lucy started, when it started to be built. And so the project, in consultation with the community partners, is founded upon this question of this research question: what are the ingredients necessary for a First Nations community must be able to exist a right of autodetermination in the context of mine development on the territory. So questions that come with that is, what does that mean? We already talked with Terry Mitchell. What does that mean of self-determination? Is free and informed consent, is it a sufficient ingredient? And if not, what are the other essential ingredients so that Indigenous people can exert this right in their territory in a mining context? So what comes out of the project for the moment, because well, the data are starting to be collected, and I'm just starting to the data is already in, but I'm just starting to examine them with Davikin and the rest of the team. But what really strikes me here is what makes it so that the Cree are advantaged in this situation. How could they sign an collaboration agreement where Mayaman were imposed a mine, and that came out of the exchange between the partners, and particularly came out in a conversation that Aniceto Lopez, the partner of Jeremia, had with Sami Blackmed when we visited Wominji last October together after a CICADA meeting. It was like, wow, they have not only collective rights, but they exert them collectively. The fact of having a convention territory means that nobody can sell their land to the company independently. There's an obligation, there are mechanisms in place so that the community must be consulted internally, and we have to talk about it, we have to decide together. It is not just, I'm going to sell my land, whereas in Guatemala, the municipality San Miguel Ixhuahuacan has a collective title, and so there was this possibility, but the problem is there was a process overlaid on that was imposed where everybody, well, people were able to have an escritura. I don't know how to translate it in French or English. I will leave it to our translators, but they had some, escritura means writing, but some kind of document that allows them to sell their title individually on their land, and that is how the company came in. They worked very hard with the most vulnerable people. The first person that sold their land was a widowed woman, so they got a foothold that way. But it's not something, it's something that is possible, but doesn't mean that it's technically legal, that it is perceived as being legitimate from the community standpoint. So, of course, people are angry at the local level, and that's what initiated the movement of resistance against the mine, the fact that there was this illegitimate process in their eyes of appropriating the land. And so, 1 second, I'm lost here. Okay, the other thing that advantages the Crees as opposed to the Mayaman and San Miguel is financial resources. Of course, the Cree could hire lawyers, consultants, and as was mentioned by a woman that worked for the Cree Trappers Association in Wominji, they had the resources, no rocks were left unturned. They had the resources to make sure that the accord that they would sign would be advantageous for them, or at the very least what they wanted to have as far as protecting their interests in ratifying this agreement. So that is absolutely not the case in Guatemala. The people, the rates of extreme, it's a very, very poor area, and the people who work to defend their territory do it with very few means. And so, however, there would have been of course, mechanisms in place in Guatemala officially so that the populations beyond the problem of collective title and escritura, the Guatemala is a signatory of OIT 169, and so there's this obligation of consultation. There is in the law in Guatemala an obligation of consultation when there are development projects, but the problem is that the lobbying and the communities talked about that. I think it's Hector who talked about mechanisms that are developed by communities themselves to defend their rights, and something that started in the region of San Marcos is the MOOCs, the popular consultations, the indigenous people that started without there being an official mechanism around that. They initiated their own process of popular consultation and started a movement that way, a movement of consultation that spread like wildfire in Guatemala, where people, and now it's to the point where communities are consulted around situations, are interested in having mining activities before even a mining project is proposed. The problem with that is up to now the attitude of the government in Guatemala is to consider these consultations as non-executory for technical and on technicalities, legal technicalities. They just dismiss them. I'm not going to get into the details. We'll talk about that maybe at some point in the future. But all this means that because we came in and the company came in, they bought the consent little by little. There wasn't any communal decisions around if we want to mine or not. And so to come back to the question of conflict, there's an enormous social conflict for many years now, but that persists in San Marcos. The other thing is the self-determination doesn't come into play only during consultation and ratification of an accord. That is especially research that is done with Mathieu Gauthier, a student, a master's student. In Wimingi, the consultation and signature of an accord that's not only what is essential to realizing this right, but what the data shows for now is that, in fact, one of the problems is what happens once the accord is signed. And now I come to the question of ontologies, as Colin talked about. I'm going to come back to a relational ontology for Crees, and etc. I'm not going to come back on that. We already talked about it, but it's a relationship. So there must be a reciprocity that is there. We must look at the terms of an agreement, make adjustments to the context, and the company doesn't want to hear any of that. And so that creates, I would say, much animosity and frustration and distress, principally among the users of the territory who have their trap lines close to the mine. And so, in the words of a woman who hunts and fishes, now that the mine produces gold, it's not interested in maintaining the relationship with us, and that is a source of a great frustration. So, to conclude, the project with regards to the axis of CICADA is related to the axis of life projects, ontological violence that Sylvie Proya was talking about, that comes from the non-consideration of a relational ontology. Sylvie talked about the deep wounds, and this woman said, sorry, Mr. Translator, when I think in the language, they only like my signature. And so she started to talk to me about how the mine has affected the life of the relationships with animals on the territory of hunting and fishing, and she shares it with tears in her eyes. It's not something that is just like that. There's something light for her. It's very, very deep. And so we talked about ontology yesterday, before yesterday, but the idea of having a life project and to articulate it has not come out of nowhere. I think Studnicki-Gizbert that is really came out of the movement of defending the territory for the members of Frédémy, for the tenure, so to definitely clear in the case where I say that the mode of tenure is key to maintaining a project, alternative to neoliberal life plans, and we saw the contrast between Womenji and Studnicki-Gizbert, and Hector was talking about the importance of putting concentrating on strategy defending the territory. That's what we see, particularly in Studnicki-Gizbert, and these are really people who deploy all kinds of efforts to defend their territory, from judicial direct action, and we are also engaged in this community in renovating the ancestral authority, something that is quite recent for this municipality. And finally, I know it's not one of our axes. We defined it as mapping and visual participatory, I don't remember methodology. And anyway, for me, since I've been with Instead and CICADA on the side that made me think about my methodology and my ethical engagements, and you could just imagine what a research project is with two communities that have contrasting positions with regards to the same company. It put me in very delicate situations, and thanks to my colleagues, I could navigate through that without too much gray hairs, but it's not easy, and it brings up the question, what is the community? Who represents whom? Who speaks in whose name? It's heterogeneous, and it's not everybody that has the same relationship with the territory and who defends the same interests or have the same vision or life project. And so how we consider that when we have a research project like ours, the question of engagement, solidarity. We talked about wanting to move into the direction of inter-partnership solidarity. What does that mean? However, when we don't have the same relationship with the company, where we try to bring the Guatemalans, the Guatemalan partners to in Womenji, we bring them to Womenji. The door was closed by Gold Corp, and I'm not going to get into details, but that's what happened. And so, also, for me, this whole project is also a question of so how to produce counter discourse that will be effective, but also with respect to different positions with regards to extractive ideologies. I was approached by the CSR office, the Office for Canadian Social Responsibility for Businesses that is within the Minister of Foreign Affairs, under the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I know that the Mayamam, they don't want anything to do with that, but how do I engage with the decision makers and the people who make decisions while respecting the position of the Frenemy people who have nothing to do with government institutions from Canada. So what's the next step? I'll follow up. We'll follow with that. So the Frenemy San Miguel, we are asking more and more questions about the impacts, but also in Women G, because one of the things that was not clearly defined in the Accord of Collaboration was the question of socio-political, cultural impacts. We worked a lot on socio-environmental impacts, but not much on cultural and social impacts, and there's a lot of questions on we talked already a lot about it. I won't come back on it, but Mikamilo, for example, has really insisted on how to get out of this market-based logic when we talk about impacts. And now I am starting a project with Stephen Tora and Kevin Debier, who could not be here. We started to put together young people from different communities where we work that are all accepted by the extractive industries to try to, for a video participative project, a video project, so to do the research, but on giving back in a concrete way to communities that we are working with. So I will stop there.
Okay, one question or comment. Viviane.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So, as you know, I've been involved in a similar project with Dene, Lotoke Dene First Nation and Lokono people in Suriname around BHP Billiton. And what I found when I was doing that work was that it was very clear that an impact benefit agreement doesn't necessarily mean that there's been self-determination or consent. And it's I'm finding that industry often says that if you've signed something, that means you've consented. But my question is, when you look at the Cree Nation, did they really consent? I mean, they signed an impact benefit agreement, but they may not have wanted that project, and they may have felt that they needed to sign that to get any benefits out of it. I'm just putting that out there because I'm wondering, we can't just take the fact that they've signed an impact benefit agreement as that they've consented to the project. What I found is that they've consented to receiving some of the benefits and mitigating the socio-environmental impacts of a project that's going to go ahead anyway. And that in the work that I did with the Dene, it was very clear to me that they felt they couldn't say no to the mine. Okay, so my question is just, I think we need to be very careful when we're looking at impact benefit agreements to make sure that we don't associate that with having given your consent necessarily for a people. And then this just brings me to something that Clint was talking about, there you are, which is something in the work that we're all doing that I think could be interesting to pull up on, which is you need to consent for a consultation to take place. And this whole tiredness of all these various projects going on, and how do you say no? And this is something that's come up with in Colombia in the work that I do. How can you just say, no, we don't even want that consultation in the first place because we don't want that project and we don't want to be tired out. We've got too much to do. So there's also a right to consent to not have a consultation to get your consent for a project. I don't know how to explain this in a simpler term, but I think that's something that's coming up a lot is how do you figure out how to say no to a consultation project? And that's your right. You don't want that consultation to take place because you don't want that project. And you know right from the get-go, and it's just going to tire out people. So it's something that's come up a lot in Colombia because there's consultation is there for everything, and that's just a question. But I think that the video side of things is going to be very, very interesting. So I'm looking forward to seeing that.
So quick answer. I don't want to speak for the community, and Sammy could say that he doesn't agree with me, but from the public, like what I get when I ask the question, when you circulate in the community, is that yes, they've consented. I mean, but as Colin explained, yesterday, or anyway, when we talked, or I think it was Monica, when she talked about, I don't remember who said what, but the protected area and the claim, and that's the context where the Eleanor mine was consented to, was that they were able to say, they said no to a mine within their protected, where they wanted their protected area, but this is pristine environment that had not yet been affected by Hydro-Québec, while where the mine is land that had already been affected by Hydro-Québec. So the attachment, and people can correct me, I mean, so I really don't want to takes people's lunchtime, but
It is a very interesting and particular context, and we could talk more about it over lunch.
yeah. But the other thing I would like to add is that it's consent, from what I'm getting from my research, doesn't stop at the signing of the agreement, and that's the problem right now. Voilà.
Thanks, Karine. Yes.
There's a gentleman here. He came with a friend.